Today we delve into a gripping story that took place in the heart of America in 2003. On November 22nd of that year, 22-year-old Dru Sjodin was walking to her car after finishing her shift and chatting with her boyfriend on the phone. Suddenly, the conversation was interrupted, and her boyfriend didn't think much of it at the time. Little did he know that this moment would change his life forever. Dru Sjodin was born on September 26, 1981, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She was the younger of two children to her parents, Alan and Linda. When Dru was just 3 years old, her parents divorced, but they remained friends. From the age of 10, Dru and her brother Sven were raised by Linda and her second husband, Sid Walker, a travel agent. They lived in a comfortable home on Whitefish Lake, one of Minnesota's most scenic vacation spots. Dru thrived in high school, becoming an honor student, joining the golf team, and even being elected homecoming queen in 1999. But her true passion was art, and her room at home was filled with sketches of rock stars, models, and friends. After graduating from high school, she attended the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, a city of about 50,000 people. Friends described Dru as a person in love with life, always ready to lend a helping hand to anyone in need. She often traveled around the country, but her dream was to visit Australia, and she was planning to go there in the spring of 2004. Dru was determined to save up some extra cash. She took 2 jobs in her spare time. By day, she was a sales associate at the glamorous Victoria's Secret store, and by night, she worked as a waitress at a happening nightclub in Grand Forks. Now, let's fast forward to November 22nd, 2003. Dru's shift at Victoria's Secret ended at 4 p.m., but her day was far from over. Instead of heading straight to the nightclub, she decided to treat herself to a little shopping spree. After doing her shopping at the mall, she called her boyfriend Chris Lang to share her excitement. As Dru chatted away, making her way to her car in the parking lot, something strange happened. The call abruptly disconnected after she uttered the words, "Okay." Chris didn't think much of it. After all, they weren't discussing anything important. Fast forward 3 hours later, and Chris's phone rang once again. It was Dru calling, or so he thought. However, when he answered, all he could hear was the eerie sound of wind and buttons being pressed on the phone. Something was definitely not right. It seemed like a simple disconnection, something that could happen to anyone. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine the terrible events that were unfolding. Dru was living in a college dorm, sharing a room with her friend Meg Murphy. Around the same time as Chris's strange phone call, Meg received a call from the nightclub. They were concerned about Dru's absence and her failure to answer the phone. Dru was known for being a responsible employee, always showing up early. Her absence immediately raised alarm bells. In a frantic search for her missing friend, Meg first reached out to mutual acquaintances and then called the local hospital. Unfortunately, she was told that Dru had not been admitted there. Feeling helpless and desperate, Meg called the police. Knowing that Dru worked at Columbia Mall, a police officer was dispatched there. By the time the officer arrived, the mall was already closed. Driving around the parking lot, the officer spotted Dru's car. Upon closer inspection, the car was unlocked and there were no signs of a struggle or any other crime. However, a black nylon sheath from a folding knife was found on the ground near the car. Inside the car, there were papers, a wallet, and a new purse that Dru had purchased that day. This suggested that even if Dru had faced some dirty deed, it certainly hadn't been a robbery. With no leads from friends, boyfriends, or parents, investigators began to lean toward the theory that they were dealing with a kidnapping. Detectives checked out Chris Lang, but he was almost immediately ruled out as a suspect because he was in Minnesota, 300 miles from Grand Forks. From Chris, the police learned about the 2 phone calls Dru had made. The next day, when the mall where Dru worked opened, the detectives arrived there to review the security camera footage. Unfortunately, there were no security cameras in the parking lot where Dru's car was parked. However, there were quite a few security cameras inside the mall. Going through the footage, detectives found a moment when Dru went into one of the local stores after work. She bought herself a purse, was calm, and in no hurry to go anywhere. She was wearing a pink sweater and was holding a jacket. At 4:55 p.m., Dru paid for her purchase at the register, put on her jacket, and left the store. As she made her way out, Dru had called Chris before leaving. At exactly 5 p.m., the call connected, and just as Dru was about to say something important, the call was cut off. It lasted only 4 minutes, but that was enough to raise suspicions. One of the detectives working on the case decided to conduct an experiment. Setting a timer for 4 minutes, he retraced Dru's steps from the store where she bought her purse to the parking lot where her car was parked. As the alarm sounded, indicating that 4 minutes had passed, the detective found himself in the parking lot near where Dru's car had been found. It was clear that something had happened to her while she was at her car. Unfortunately, the lack of surveillance cameras overlooking the parking lot made it difficult to investigate her disappearance. News of Dru's disappearance quickly spread, capturing the attention of the media. People from all walks of life learned about her story and were moved by her misfortune. Many couldn't stand by and do nothing. Over 1,000 volunteers, in addition to the dedicated police officers, joined the search for Dru. Even the FBI officers lent their expertise to the investigation. The last call made from Dru's phone was traced to a small town called Fisher in neighboring Minnesota. Surprisingly, it was only a 30-minute drive from the mall where she worked. Looking at the map, the area surrounding these 2 towns is filled with vast fields. The police utilized helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, horses and dogs to comb through these fields, hoping to find any clue that could lead them to Dru. The search for Dru had been going on for days, with no leads to follow. The landowners had been asked to check their properties, but unfortunately, this yielded no results. The search radius was increased with each passing day, but still, nothing was found. That was until an ominous discovery was made in the small town of Crookston. A boot was found under a bridge, and it was later confirmed to belong to Dru. The fact that the shoe was found in Crookston, a town of less than 10,000 people, located about 30 miles from where Dru disappeared, only added to the mystery. Further searches in the Crookston area yielded no results, and a reward of $20,000 was initially offered for information that would help to determine Dru's whereabouts. The reward was later increased to $140,000, but still, there was no sign of Dru. The detectives decided to focus their attention on the surveillance footage at Columbia Mall. They spent hours watching hundreds of hours of footage from various cameras, looking for any clues that could lead them to Dru. They speculated that whoever abducted her may have been following her and may also have been on the videos. After hours of watching, they finally saw the person who had caught their attention. A man was walking aimlessly around the mall, not buying anything, and seemed to be looking more at the people around him than at the merchandise being sold. He sat down on a bench near the mall exit and continued to watch people casually walk past him. After about 10 minutes, he got up from the bench, wearing black gloves on his hands, and walked out into the lobby where there was a camera hanging overhead into which he looked. This shot was taken 72 minutes before Dru's conversation with her boyfriend was interrupted, and she disappeared. The detectives were now more determined than ever to find Dru and bring her home. They knew that the man in the footage could be the key to solving the case, and they were going to do everything in their power to find him. Investigators noticed a peculiar pattern. Every time a blonde woman carrying a grocery cart walked past him, he would follow her towards the parking lot. Detectives were quick to dismiss this as a mere coincidence. In their opinion, the man had carefully chosen his victim and was stalking her. The identity of this man was unknown, but the police were aware that only one person, Dru Sjodin, had disappeared from the mall parking lot that day. The resemblance between Dru and the woman the suspicious man was following was uncanny, leading investigators to believe that he had a particular image of his victim in mind. If the kidnapper was indeed this man, and if he had failed to abduct the woman he was following, his next target might have been Dru. She had left the mall around 5 p.m., a time when it was already dark, which might have played into the hands of the perpetrator. At this point in the investigation, there were 3 cities involved in the case: Grand Forks, where Dru was kidnapped; Fisher, where her phone was last active; and Crookston, where her shoe was found. The FBI began combing through the files of all registered sex offenders from these cities and their environs, comparing the photos from the files with the image of the suspicious man from the mall. After a thorough search, only one man matched all the parameters: Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. He had an extensive criminal history of repeated crimes against women, making him the prime suspect in the case. Rodriguez had been convicted of attempted kidnapping and aggravated assault and was sentenced to 23 years in prison. He was released in May 2003, just 6 months before Dru disappeared. Despite being registered as a sex offender of the highest 3rd degree, which meant his risk of reoffending was extremely high, Rodriguez was released from prison and went to live with his mother in Crookston, just a few miles from where Dru's shoe had been found. Even Rodriguez's family feared he would return to his old ways. When detectives talked to him, he denied any involvement in Dru's disappearance, but police found dark red dried stains in several places in his car, which forensics later determined were drops of Dru's blood. Sadly, it seemed that finding Dru alive was unlikely, and Sheriff Dan Hill believed it was more of a recovery than a rescue mission. The blood found at the scene of Dru's disappearance was a DNA match with Dru herself. Investigators were able to obtain DNA from Dru's toothbrush, which led to this breakthrough discovery. But that's not all. A folding knife was found in the trunk of a suspect's car, and it matched the sheath found in the parking lot next to Dru's car. The suspect, Rodriguez, had even purchased the knife and sheath from a hardware store just a few hundred yards away from where Dru disappeared. Despite not finding Dru alive or dead, investigators had enough evidence to charge Rodriguez just 8 days after her disappearance. He was arrested but refused to speak to law enforcement officials or provide any information about Dru's whereabouts. Meanwhile, the search for Dru continued tirelessly, with searchers facing the added challenge of heavy snowfall in the area. The search for Dru was intense and lasted for 5 long months. Despite all the efforts made, there were no results. The authorities had to suspend the search operation due to worsening weather conditions. But in spring, the search continued with renewed hope. Those searching for Dru were eager to find her as the winter snow had just begun to melt. Finally, on April 17, 2004, Dru's body was found in a field in Crookston, just a few miles from where her boot had been found. The news of Dru's death was heart-wrenching for her family. Her father told reporters that they were waiting for that call, and when it came, they all stopped living for a second. It was their worst nightmare, one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The field where Dru's body was found had already been searched, but apparently, because of the large drifts, they could not find it immediately. Dru was naked below the waist, which made the motive of the crime obvious. Her hands were tied behind her back, and there was a rope around her neck. A cut under the rope indicated that a plastic bag had first been put over Dru's head and then tied around her neck with a rope. Hair matching Rodriguez's DNA was found on Dru's jacket. Before she died, the young woman had been brutally beaten and stabbed repeatedly. The medical examiner listed 3 possible causes of her death: the cut on her neck, suffocation, or hypothermia. After many months without a word, Dru's family was finally able to say goodbye to her on April 24, 2004. The search for justice continued, But the loss of Dru was a tragedy that would never be forgotten. Over 1,500 people gathered for the mourning ceremony in North Dakota, where Dru Sjodin was kidnapped and where the death penalty was abolished back in 1975. Although Minnesota, where Dru's body was found, did not use the death penalty as a punishment, the crime was considered a federal offense since Dru had been transported across state lines. This gave the prosecutor's office the right to seek the death penalty for Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., who was convicted in the Dru Sjodin case on August 30th, 2006. After 6 years on death row, Rodriguez became the first person sentenced to death in North Dakota in nearly a century. However, in 2021, the judge who had previously sentenced Rodriguez to death, Ralph Erickson, overturned his own conviction and ordered a new sentencing phase. The issue at hand is not Rodriguez's guilt, which has been confirmed by various types of DNA testing, but rather the death penalty itself. Erickson cited the failure of defense attorneys to properly examine Rodriguez's mental health and the misleading testimony of forensic expert Michael McGee. The expert's testimony stated that Rodriguez violated Dru's sexual integrity within 24 to 36 hours of the abduction, but there was no direct evidence to support this claim. Erickson noted that even without Rodriguez's seminal fluid, the evidence pointed to a sexually motivated crime. Dru's body was found naked below the waist, with her hands tied behind her back. Judge Erickson was appalled that Rodriguez's mental health was never examined, a clear violation of his constitutional rights. After Rodriguez's death sentence was overturned, the federal prosecutor's office vowed to seek the death penalty again, but 2 years later, they abandoned those plans and accepted that Rodriguez would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's a haunting story of justice delayed, but ultimately served. The United States has made it clear that they will not tolerate heinous crimes like the one committed against Dru. Although the directive to withdraw the death notice has changed how the United States Attorney's Office will proceed with this case, what will not change is that Rodriguez will draw his last breath in a federal prison. This case led to significant changes in sex offender registration laws. On July 27, 2006, President George Bush signed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, which included Dru's law. This law changed the name of the National Sex Offender Public Registry to the Dru Sjodin National Sex Offender Public Website, which provides information to the public on the whereabouts of registered sex offenders, regardless of state, territory, or tribal boundaries. Our heart goes out to the family of Dru Sjodin, especially her parents Linda Walker and Alan Sjodin. They are truly remarkable people and loving parents who have endured an unimaginable loss, and we hope them for the greatest measure of peace possible. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.